The mocking commander Varth Keln had seen many species in his long career as a military leader of the Silurian Dominion, and none of them had ever impressed him quite as little as the humans did when they first walked into Nexus Station. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, with thick green scales covering his entire body, like natural armor that had protected his kind for millions of years. And his claws were sharp enough to tear through metal plating without much effort at all. The Silurians had conquered 11 different species across the galaxy, and they had done it through strength and power and the simple fact that nothing could match them in physical combat. So when the doors to the great assembly hall opened and the human delegation walked in for their first official contact with the galactic community, Varth felt his mouth curl into what his species used as a smile. They were tiny, the tallest among them barely reached his chest, and their skin looked soft and fragile like the membrane of a newborn Silurian. Before the scales grew in, they had no claws and no fangs and no visible weapons built into their bodies, and they moved with a strange, smooth grace that Varth immediately mistook for the careful movements of prey animals trying not to attract attention. The one leading their group was a female called Captain Elena Vasquez, according to the translation device in his ear. And she was even smaller than most of the others in her group. She had dark hair pulled back tight against her head and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with a calm, steady gaze that Varth found almost amusing. How could such a small, soft creature look at him without fear when he could crush her skull with one hand? Assembly Hall was filled with representatives from dozens of species, and all of them watched as the humans took their place at the center of the room, where new species were always presented to the galactic community. Varth noticed that some of the other representatives seemed nervous, and he could not understand why there had been rumors about these humans for several cycles now, ever since their primitive radio signals had been detected coming from a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system. Some of the older species had warned that the humans should be approached with caution, but Varth had dismissed such warnings as the paranoid ramblings of species that had grown weak and fearful over time. Looking at them now, he felt completely justified in his dismissal. The High Arbiter of the Galactic Council rose from her seat and began the formal introduction ceremony, but Varth barely listened because he was too busy studying the humans and finding them more and more pathetic with every passing moment. They wore clothing made of plant fibers and synthetic materials because their own bodies could not protect them from the elements. They carried no weapons because they clearly relied on technology to defend themselves. Since their own bodies were useless in combat, they were small and soft and weak, and everything about them screamed prey animal to Varath's predator instincts. When the formal introduction was finished, the High Arbiter invited questions from the assembled representatives, and Varth stepped forward immediately because he simply could not contain himself any longer. "I have a question for the human delegation," he announced in a voice loud enough to echo through the entire hall. Captain Vasquez turned to face him, and there was something in her expression that he could not quite read, but he was too focused on his own amusement to pay much attention to it. "This is what the galaxy has been so worried about," Varth said, and he let his laughter boom through the chamber as he gestured at the small group of humans with one massive clawed hand. "These hairless prey animals are what some of our oldest species warned us to approach with caution," he continued. And more laughter escaped him as several other predator species in the assembly joined in. "My younglings could snap them in half without even trying, and yet we're supposed to treat them as equals in this galactic community." The laughter spread through parts of the assembly hall, although Varth noticed that some species remained silent and watchful. Captain Vasquez did not flinch, and she did not look away from him, and she did not show any sign of fear or anger or humiliation. Instead, she simply smiled. It was not the smile of someone who had been defeated or embarrassed. It was patient and knowing, and something about it made Varth feel a tiny flicker of uncertainty that he immediately crushed because he was a Silurian commander. And he did not feel uncertainty when looking at soft little prey animals. "Commander," Elena said in a calm, clear voice that carried through the hall without her needing to raise it at all, "I would suggest you review Earth's ecological data before making assumptions about my species." Varth waved one massive hand dismissively. "I have no need to review anything," he replied with another laugh. "I can see everything I need to know just by looking at you, and what I see is a species that would not last one day against any real predator." "Is that so?" Elena said, and her smile did not waver even slightly. "The Silurian Dominion has conquered 11 species," Vorth announced proudly to the assembly. "We have fought against creatures with venomous fangs and armored hides and claws, sharper than any blade, and we have defeated them all because we are the superior predators." He stepped closer to the front human delegation and loomed over Captain Vasquez with his full height on display. "What weapons do humans have?" he asked mockingly. "Where are your claws and your fangs and your armor and your venom?" Elena looked up at him without stepping back even a single centimeter. "We do not need them," she said simply. This drew more laughter from Vorth and from some of the other species watching. "Every species needs natural weapons," Vorth declared. "It is the way of the universe that the strong survive and the weak are conquered. And from what I can see, humans are very, very weak." "Commander Vorth," the High Arbiter interrupted with a note of warning in her voice. "This is a formal first contact ceremony, and insults are not appropriate. I speak only the truth," Vorth replied without taking his eyes off the small human woman in front of him. "And the truth is that these humans are nothing special, and certainly nothing to be feared." Captain Vasquez nodded slowly, as if she had expected exactly this reaction. "Perhaps," she said in that same calm voice, "you would like to test that theory." The assembly hall went quiet. "What did you say?" Vorth asked. "I said, perhaps you would like to test your theory about human weakness," Elena repeated, and her smile grew just a little bit wider. "Unless, of course, the mighty Silurian Dominion is afraid of a challenge from hairless prey animals." The wrath scales flushed darker with anger at the suggestion that he could ever be afraid of anything, especially something as small and soft as a human. "Name your challenge," he growled, and Captain Elena Vasquez looked up at the massive alien warrior who had just mocked her entire species in front of the galactic community, and her smile never wavered as she began to explain exactly what she had in mind. The galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson about the dangers of underestimating humanity, and Commander Vorth Kelm was about to become that lesson's first student. The wager to Assembly Hall remained silent as Captain Elena Vasquez explained her proposal to Commander Vorth Kelm, and every representative in the room leaned forward to hear what this small, soft human had in mind. "A survival trial," Elena said calmly. "1 week on a neutral world with no weapons and no technology, and no outside help." Vorth let out a short laugh, because this sounded like exactly the kind of challenge where his natural advantages would shine. "Just our natural abilities against whatever the environment throws at us," Elena continued. "The first one to give up or require rescue loses." "And what do we gain from this trial?" Vorth asked with his arms crossed over his massive scaled chest. "If you win," Elena replied, "humanity will acknowledge that the Silurian Dominion is the superior species, and we will defer to your judgment in all matters before this council for the next 10 cycles. Murmurs spread through the assembly hall because this was a significant concession that would give the Silurians enormous political power over the new species. "And if you win," Vorth asked, though he clearly considered this possibility to be so unlikely that he almost laughed while saying it. "If I win," Elena said, "you will publicly apologize for your insults, and the Silurian Dominion will support humanity's full membership in the Galactic Council without any conditions or restrictions." Vorth considered this for a moment, but not for very long, because he was absolutely certain that there was no possible way he could lose a survival challenge against this tiny, fragile creature. I accept, he announced loudly, but I have one condition. Name it. Elena said. I choose the conditions of the trial, Vareth declared. I will select a world that is harsh and dangerous, and we will see how long your soft human body can survive. Elena's expression did not change at all as she shook her head slowly. That was not my proposal. She replied, the trial should be fair to both parties, which means we should use conditions that neither of us has evolved for. She paused, and that strange knowing smile appeared on her face again. Unless, she added, you would prefer to use Earth conditions. Vareth had never heard of Earth before this day, and he had no idea what conditions the human homeworld might have, but he was not about to admit that to anyone in this assembly hall. Standard gravity and atmosphere and wildlife. From your planet, Elena explained. Surely the mighty Silurian Dominion can handle whatever a world full of soft prey animals has to offer. Several of the older species in the assembly shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and Vareth noticed that even the High Arbiter seemed concerned, but he dismissed their reactions as more paranoid nonsense. What could possibly be dangerous about the homeworld of these tiny, hairless creatures? I agree to your terms, Vareth announced confidently. Earth conditions it is. Excellent, Elena said, and something flickered in her eyes that Vareth would later recognize as anticipation. The Galactic Council can provide a suitable planet, and we can begin the trial as soon as the environment is prepared. The High Arbiter rose from her seat with a troubled expression on her face. Are both parties certain about this agreement? She asked. Once the trial begins, it cannot be stopped except by surrender or emergency rescue. I'm certain, Vareth declared. As am I, Elena agreed. Then the Galactic Council will arrange for a suitable trial world, the High Arbiter announced. Observers will be assigned to document the trial and ensure fairness. She hesitated for a moment before adding one more thing. I would recommend that Commander Vareth review the available data on Earth before the trial begins. Vareth waved this suggestion away with one massive hand because he had no interest in studying the homeworld of prey animals over the next several days. The news of the trial spread across the galaxy, and betting pools opened on dozens of stations and colonies. The odds overwhelmingly favored the Silurian commander because everyone could see how large and powerful he was compared to the small, soft human Captainvrith spent those days boasting to anyone who would listen about how easily he would crush this challenge and how humanity would soon learn their place in the galactic hierarchy. Elena spent those days answering questions from curious representatives who wanted to know more about Earth and its many inhabitants. She spoke calmly about her planet and its history, and she described the creatures that lived there, alongside humans, with a casual tone that suggested she found nothing unusual about any of it. Some of the older species listened carefully to her descriptions, and the more she talked, the more worried they became. Commander Vareth, one ancient representative, warned him the night before the trial was scheduled to begin. I have reviewed the data on the human homeworld, and I strongly urge you to reconsider this challenge. Why? Vareth asked with amusement. What could possibly concern you about a planet full of soft, weak creatures? The humans are not weak, the old representative replied with fear evident in his voice. And their world is classified as Category 12 in our database. Vareth paused because Category 12 was the highest danger rating the Galactic Council could assign to a planet. That must be an error, he said dismissively. It is not an error, the representative insisted. Earth is one of the most lethal worlds ever discovered, and the humans are the only sentient species to have evolved there because everything else that tried was killed by the environment. Vareth laughed loudly at this. If Earth is so dangerous, then how did these soft little creatures survive it? He asked. That, the old representative said quietly, is exactly what you are about to find out. The next morning, Vorath and Elena boarded a transport ship that would take them to the trial world, where a section of terrain had been transformed. To match Earth conditions exactly, Vorath stood at the viewing window and watched as the planet grew larger below them. He noticed that Elena stood beside him, and she was watching the planet too, with an expression that might have been fondness. Have you ever been to a Category 12 world before? Elena asked without looking at him. There are only 3 such worlds in explored space, Vorath replied, and no one goes to them willingly. I grew up on one, Elena said calmly. Every human has. She turned to look at him, and for the first time Vorath noticed something in her eyes that he had not seen before. It was not fear or weakness or the nervousness of a prey animal. It was the calm, patient confidence of a predator who knew exactly what was coming. Welcome to Earth conditions, Commander, Elena said as the transport began its descent. I hope you survive the experience. And for the first time since this challenge had been proposed, Vorath felt a small, cold seed of doubt begin to grow in his chest, but it was far too late to turn back now. The landing. The transport ship touched down in the middle of what the humans called the Australian outback, and Vorath stepped out into the most hostile environment he had ever experienced in his entire military career. The heat hit him like a physical wall. The temperature display on the observer drone hovering nearby showed 43 degrees Celsius, and Vorath felt his body immediately begin to struggle against the oppressive warmth that seemed to press down on him from every direction. His species had evolved on a temperate moon where the weather was mild and consistent, and his internal systems were simply not designed to handle this kind of extreme heat. Elena stepped out beside him, and she did not seem bothered by the temperature at all. She wore simple clothing that covered most of her skin, and she had wrapped a piece of fabric around her head to protect herself from the sun. But otherwise she moved as if this crushing heat was completely normal. The trial begins now, the observer drone announced in a neutral voice. Both participants must survive for 7 standard days without weapons or technology. Vorath looked around at the landscape and saw nothing but red dirt and scattered vegetation and a few twisted trees that looked half dead from the brutal conditions. This is your homeworld? He asked with disbelief in his voice. Part of it, Elena replied as she began walking toward a rocky outcrop in the distance. Australia is actually one of the more dangerous regions, but it has the best weather this time of year. This is the best weather, Vorath demanded as sweat began to form on his scales, which should have been impossible because Silurians did not sweat. Summer can get much hotter. Elena called back over her shoulder. Without stopping, Vorath forced himself to move and follow her because he refused to show weakness in front of this small, soft human who seemed completely unbothered by conditions that were already making him feel sick. Within 2 hours, his body began to fail him. His movements became slow and sluggish as best. His internal temperature climbed higher and higher because his species had no efficient way to dump excess heat. Elena, on the other hand, seemed to be doing just fine. She was sweating heavily, but she explained that this was actually how humans cooled themselves down. Our bodies push water to the surface of our skin, and when it evaporates, it takes the heat with it, she said, as she watched him struggle to keep up with her walking pace. That is disgusting, Vorath gasped. That is efficient, Elena corrected. Humans evolved in conditions like this, and our bodies learned to regulate temperature through perspiration. She paused and looked back at him with something that might have been concern. You need to find shade, she said. Your body cannot handle this heat for much longer. Vorath wanted to argue, but he could feel the truth of her words in every cell of his overheating body. So he followed her to a rocky overhang that provided some relief from the relentless sun while he recovered in the shade. Elena went looking for water, and when she returned, she was carrying several large leaves that held a surprising amount of liquid. The plants here have adapted to store water, she explained as she offered some to him. You have to know where to look. Vareth drank the water gratefully and tried not to think about the fact that he was already depending on this tiny human to survive. As the day continued, he encountered more and more reasons to be terrified of this world. First, there was the snake. It was coiled under a rock that Vareth had been about to sit on, and Elena grabbed his arm and pulled him back just before he lowered himself onto it. "Brown snake," she said calmly as the creature slithered away. "Its venom can kill a human in under an hour, and given your size and biology, it would probably work even faster." "Why does a snake need venom that powerful?" Vareth asked with horror in his voice. "Everything on Earth is competing to survive." Elena replied, "If you are not the most dangerous thing in your environment, and something else will eat you." Then there were the spiders. They found dozens of them in the rocky areas, and some of them were larger than Varath's hand with fangs that glistened with moisture. Funnel web spiders, Elena explained. Their venom attacks the nervous system and causes extreme pain and muscle spasms before death. "Are there any creatures here that are not venomous?" Vareth demanded. "Some of them are poisonous instead," Elena said. "Different mechanism, but same result if you eat them or touch them." She pointed to a colorful frog sitting near a small pool of water. "That one, for example," she said. "Touching its skin would make you very sick by nightfall." Vareth had also encountered something called a saltwater crocodile, which was a massive reptile that moved with terrifying speed. Despite its size, he had stumbled upon it while looking for water, and it had launched itself at him so fast that he barely escaped with his scales intact. "They are ambush predators," Elena explained after he came running back to their makeshift camp. "They wait in the water and then explode outward to grab anything that comes too close." "How did humans survive on this world?" Vareth asked, and for the first time there was genuine fear in his voice. Instead of mockery, Elena sat down across from him and began building a small fire using techniques that seemed to come as naturally to her as breathing. "We learned to be more dangerous than everything else," she said simply. "Humans are persistent predators, which means we do not need to be faster or stronger than our prey." She struck two rocks together, and sparks flew into the dry grass she had gathered. "We just need to keep going until our prey collapses from exhaustion," she continued. "Humans can walk and run for longer than almost any other creature on Earth because our bodies are designed to keep moving no matter what." The fire caught and began to grow, and Elena fed it carefully with dry sticks and leaves. "Most predators give up after a short chase," she said. "But humans never give up, and eventually the prey runs out of energy while we just keep coming." She looked at him across the flickering flames. "That is why nothing on Earth ever successfully hunted us to extinction," she said. "Because we simply refuse to stop." Vareth stared at this small, soft creature, who had just casually explained that her species had become the dominant life form on a death world through sheer stubborn refusal to die. And he realized for the first time that he might have made a terrible mistake. The night brought new horrors, including insects that bit and stung and crawled across his scales, looking for soft places to feed. Elena slept peacefully through all of it because her body had adapted to ignore such minor irritations over millions of years of evolution. Vareth did not sleep at all, and when the sun rose on the second day of the trial, he understood that surviving 6 more days on this nightmare world might be the hardest thing he had ever attempted in his entire life. The revelation on the 3rd day of the trial, Commander Vareth Keln fell down a ravine and broke his arm. Had been trying to climb a rocky slope to get a better view of the terrain when his heat-weakened body failed him and his foot slipped on loose stones. He tumbled down the steep incline and landed hard at the bottom with a crack that echoed through the still air. Pain was immediate and overwhelming. Vareth looked down at his arm and saw the bone jutting at an angle that should have been impossible, and he screamed louder than he had ever screamed in his entire life. Elena was beside him within minutes. She had heard his fall and had run to find him and now she knelt next to his broken body with a calm, focused expression on her face. "Hold still," she commanded as she examined his injury. "I need to set this bone before your body tries to heal around it wrong. Do not touch me." Vorith snarled through the pain because he did not want this soft little creature anywhere near his wound. "If I do not set it now, you will lose the use of this arm forever," Elena said firmly, "and then you will definitely not survive the rest of this trial." Vorith wanted to argue, but the pain was too intense, and some part of him recognized that she was right. "Fine," he gasped. "Do what you must," Elena nodded, and then she grabbed his arm and pulled and twisted with more strength than Vorith had thought her small body could contain. The bone snapped back into place, and Vorith screamed again as fresh waves of agony crashed through him, but then Elena was binding his arm with strips of fabric torn from her own clothing, and she was working quickly and efficiently like she had done this 100 times before. "How are you not in shock?" Vorith demanded through gritted teeth when she finished. "That should have been traumatizing for you to witness and perform." Elena looked at him with something like confusion on her face. "Humans have unusually high pain tolerance," she explained. "We evolved alongside everything that was trying to kill us, and we learned to function through injury." She helped him sit up and lean against a rock so he could rest on Earth. "If you stopped moving because of pain, then something would eat you," she continued. "So our ancestors learned to keep going no matter how much they were hurting." Vorith stared at her with new eyes. "Show me," he said quietly. "Show you what?" Elena asked. "Show me the proof of this," Vorith replied. "Show me that. Humans have survived what you claim to have survived." Elena was quiet for a moment, and then she began to remove her outer clothing. Vorith watched in stunned silence as she revealed the skin beneath. Scars covered her body, long ones and short ones, and round ones and jagged ones, and some that looked like teeth marks and others that looked like burns. "This one," Elena said, pointing to a pale line across her shoulder, "was from a training accident when I was 16, and I finished the exercise before getting treatment because giving up was not an option." She pointed to another scar on her leg. "This one was from a vehicle crash." She continued, "I pulled 2 other people from the wreckage before I even realized I was injured." She showed him more scars as she talked. "Broken ribs here," she said, touching her side. "Fractured skull here," she added, touching her head. "3rd-degree burns across my back from a fire I ran into to save a child." Vorith felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Any one of these injuries would have killed a Silurian," he said quietly. "Probably," Elena agreed as she put her clothing back on. "But humans heal fast, and we heal strong, and our bodies just rebuild themselves after almost any damage." She sat down across from him and looked at him steadily. "We are not fragile, Commander," she said. "We are resilient in ways that most species cannot even imagine." That night, as they huddled in a makeshift shelter while rain pounded down around them, Vorith finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the first day of the trial. "How did your species survive this world?" he asked. "Truly and completely, I want to understand." Elena stared into the small fire she had built inside the shelter, and her eyes reflected the dancing flames. "We did not just survive it," she said slowly. "We conquered it." She picked up stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks flying upward. "Every predator that tried to hunt us, we hunted back until they learned to fear us," she continued. "Every disease that tried to kill us, we studied and defeated until sickness became manageable instead of fatal." Her voice was calm, but there was something ancient and primal underneath it. "Every natural disaster that destroyed our homes we rebuilt from, and then we learned to predict and prepare for," she said. "Floods and fires and earthquakes and storms and ice ages and volcanic eruptions." She looked up at him. "We survived all of it, Commander, and then we climbed to the top of the food chain on a death world where everything was trying to murder us every single day." The rain hammered against their shelter, but inside, Elena's voice remained steady. "And then do you know what we did after we conquered Earth?" She asked. "What?" Vareth whispered. "We got bored," Elena said with a small smile. "So we started exploring space to find new challenges because our own world could not test us anymore." Voreth felt his entire understanding of humanity shift and crack and reform into something completely different. "You called us soft," Elena continued. "But softness is not weakness, and it never has been." She held up her hands, and Voreth saw that despite their lack of claws, they were covered in calluses and small scars from a lifetime of work and struggle. "We do not need armor, because we can make armor better than anything evolution could give us," she said. "We do not need claws, because we invented knives and then guns, and then weapons that can crack planets in half." Her eyes met his, and there was no fear in them at all. "We do not need venom because we mastered fire 100,000 years ago," she finished. "And fire is more dangerous than any poison." Vara thought about everything he had witnessed over the past 3 days. He thought about the brutal heat that Elena walked through without complaint. He thought about the venomous creatures she avoided with casual expertise. He thought about the way she had set his broken bone without hesitation or disgust. He thought about the scars that covered her body and the stories of survival each one represented, and he understood at last why. Some of the oldest species in the galaxy had warned him to be careful around humans. They were not soft, they were not weak, they were not prey animals. They were the most successful predators to ever evolve on one of the deadliest worlds in the known universe, and they had done it not through fangs or claws or venom or armor. They had done it through sheer unrelenting stubborn refusal to die. "I owe you an apology," Vara said quietly. Elena looked at him with surprise. "Not yet," she replied. "We still have 4 days left, and you still need to survive them." She reached out and checked the binding on his broken arm. "But I appreciate the sentiment, Commander," she added, "and I promise I will do everything I can to make sure we both make it through this trial alive." "Why?" Voreth asked. "Why help me when I insulted you and your entire species?" Elena smiled, and for the first time Voreth saw warmth in that expression instead of knowing patience, because that is what humans do. She said simply, "We protect the people around us even when they have not earned it." She lay down near the fire and closed her eyes. "Get some rest, Commander," she said. "Tomorrow is going to be another hard day." Vara stayed awake for a long time watching the flames and thinking about everything he had learned, and he realized that surviving this trial was no longer his greatest concern. His greatest concern was now figuring out how to make things right with the species he had so badly underestimated. The return extraction shuttle landed on the 7th day, and Commander Vareth Keln had never been so grateful to see a spacecraft in his entire life. He had lost 15% of his body weight during the trial, and his scales had lost their healthy shine and turned dull and cracked from the relentless heat and sun exposure. His broken arm throbbed constantly despite the makeshift splint that Elena had crafted from branches and vines. He bore wounds from creatures whose names he still could not pronounce, including a nasty bite from something called a huntsman spider that had made his entire leg swell up for 2 days. There were scratches from thorny plants and burns from touching leaves that secreted acid, and a dozen other minor injuries that would have seemed major on any other world. Captain Elena Vasquez walked beside him toward the shuttle, and she looked tired but otherwise completely fine. Her skin was darker from the sun exposure, and she had lost some weight, but she moved with the same confident grace she had shown on the first day. The past 4 days had been even harder than the first 3 on. Day 4, Voreth had developed what Elena called heat stroke, and she had spent hours cooling him down with water she collected from a hidden spring on day 5. He had accidentally stepped on something called a stonefish while crossing a shallow stream, and the venom had caused him to hallucinate for nearly 12 hours while Elena kept watch and made sure He did not wander off and get himself killed on day 6. His body had finally given out completely, and Elena had carried him for the last 8 kilometers to the extraction point. Carried him. This tiny human woman had lifted a Silurian warrior who weighed 3 times what she did, and had walked through the brutal heat of an Australian afternoon without stopping once. When Varth had asked her how she could possibly do such a thing, she had just shrugged and said that humans were built for endurance. She had also mentioned something called adrenaline, which was apparently a chemical that human bodies produced during emergencies that allowed them to perform feats of strength and stamina that should have been physically impossible. Humans were terrifying. The shuttle ride back to Nexus Station was quiet, and Vorth spent most of it sleeping because his body desperately needed rest to begin healing from everything it had endured. When they arrived at the station, there was a crowd waiting for them. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered in the main docking bay to witness the return of the trial participants, and the betting pools that had been running for the past week were about to be settled. Varth saw his fellow Silurians standing near the front of the crowd, and he saw the shock on their faces when they realized how damaged he was compared to the human woman walking calmly beside him. The High Arbiter stepped forward to officially conclude the trial. Both participants have survived the 7-day survival trial on a world with Earth-standard conditions, she announced. Neither participant surrendered or required emergency rescue. She paused and looked at Varth with an expression that was hard to read. However, she continued, the observer drones have documented that Commander Varth Keln would not have survived without significant assistance from Captain Elena Vasquez. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Captain Vasquez provided medical treatment and food and water and shelter, and on the final day, physically carried Commander Vorth to the extraction point when his body could no longer function independently. The High Arbiter turned to face the full assembly. It is the judgment of this council that Captain Vasquez has demonstrated superior survival capability, as therefore won the trial. More murmurs and some scattered applause from species who had bet on the human. But Vorth was not listening to the crowd. He was thinking about everything that had happened over the past week and everything he had learned about humanity. And everything he needed to say, I wish to address the assembly, he announced in a voice that was weaker than usual, but still loud enough to carry through the docking bay. The High Arbiter nodded and stepped as Vorth moved to the center of the room, and he was aware of how diminished he must look compared to when he had stood here 7 days ago mocking the humans. I came to this trial expecting to prove that humans were weak, he began. I expected to demonstrate the superiority of the Silurian species and to put humanity in their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. He paused and looked at Elena, who stood calmly among her delegation. I was wrong, he said simply. The crowd went completely silent. The humans are not prey, Vorth continued with conviction growing in his voice despite his exhaustion. Their world is classified Category 12, which means maximum lethality, and they evolved not despite its dangers, but because of them. He began to pace slowly as he spoke, letting his words sink in. They are persistence hunters who can chase prey until it collapses from exhaustion, he said. They are apex predators who conquered a world where everything was trying to kill them every single day. He stopped and faced the assembly directly. They have no natural weapons because they invented better ones, he declared. They have no armor because they build it stronger than any scales, and they have no venom because they mastered fire before most of our species had even begun to evolve. His voice grew stronger as he spoke. I spent 7 days on a world with Earth conditions, and I nearly died a dozen times despite having natural armor and claws and size advantages that should have made me invincible. He turned to look at Elena again, and every single time I came close to death, she saved me. He said, this tiny human woman carried me when I could not walk and healed me when I was injured and protected me when I was helpless. He bowed his massive head in the deepest gesture of respect a Silurian could offer. I underestimated humanity, he said quietly. I mocked them and insulted them and dismissed them as weak, and they responded by saving my life over and over again, even though I did not deserve their kindness. He raised his head and looked at the assembled representatives. I will not make that mistake again, he declared, and I urge every species in this assembly to learn from my error before you make the same one. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Captain Elena Vasquez stepped forward and addressed the assembly herself. Commander Vorath is right that Earth made us dangerous, she said in her calm, clear voice. But Earth also taught us something else that is just as important. She looked around at the gathered species. Earth taught us that survival means cooperation. She continued, the humans who lived alone died quickly, but the humans who worked together and protected each other thrived. A gaze settled on Vorath. We did not come to the stars to conquer, she said. We came because we finally ran out of challenges at home and we wanted to find new ones. She smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. We are looking for friends, she announced to the assembly. We want to learn from you and share what we know and build something together that none of us could build alone. Her voice grew firmer. But make no mistake, she added. We are very good at making enemies regret their choices, and any species that threatens humanity or our allies will discover exactly why Earth is classified Category 12. She turned to face Vorath directly. However, we would much rather make friends than enemies, she said, and we would like to start by offering the Silurian Dominion an alliance. The assembly erupted in surprised murmurs. Vorath stared at her in shock because this was not at all what he had expected. You should be demanding submission, he said. You won the trial, and the terms were clear. The terms were that you would apologize and support our membership in the council. Elena replied. They said nothing about submission. She extended her small soft hand toward him. I would rather have a friend than a subject. Commander, she said, and I think we have both learned enough about each other over the past week to know that our species could accomplish great things together. Vorath looked at her outstretched hand. He thought about everything she had done for him during the trial. He thought about the scars on her body and the stories they told. He thought about the way she had carried him through the heat without complaint, and he reached out with his uninjured arm and took her hand in his massive clawed grip. I accept, he said. On behalf of the Silurian Dominion, I accept your offer of alliance. Elena smiled up at him. Then welcome to humanity's circle of friends. Commander, she said, I think you will find it is a much better place to be than the alternative. The betting pools closed, and it turned out that nobody had won because nobody had bet on humanity offering friendship instead of demanding surrender. And as the assembly began to applaud and the representatives started talking excitedly about what this unprecedented alliance might mean for the galaxy, Commander Vorath Kelm stood beside Captain Elena Vasquez and realized something important. He had come to this trial expecting to prove that humans were weak instead. He had learned that true strength was not about claws or fangs or armor or venom. True strength was about endurance and resilience and the courage to help others even when they did not deserve it. True strength was about building alliances instead of empires. True strength was about choosing friendship over domination, and humanity had mastered that kind of strength long before they ever reached for the stars. The tiny Earth girl had taught him that lesson, and Commander Vorath Kelm would spend the rest of his life making sure the rest of the galaxy learned it too.